Lake Nasser is a very young lake. It was born in the 1960s after the construction of a huge hydroelectric dam in Aswan. Back then, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser wanted to modernize his country. To accomplish this, he diverted the flow of the Nile, the second longest river in the world. Once the pharaonic work was completed, the Aswan Dam created an enormous lake. In Egypt, it is called Lake Nasser in honor of the president who made it. In Sudan, it is called Lake Nubia, named after the region that vanished beneath its waters. When it was created, Lake Nasser was the biggest man-made lake in the world. Construction of the Aswan Dam began in 1960. In all, over 36,000 Egyptian workers worked tirelessly day and night, sometimes in unbearable heat. In the summer, it frequently hits 45 degrees centigrade in the shade. This gigantic building project lasted 10 years. At the time, this pharaonic challenge was considered a victory over silent nature. A victory that allowed Egypt to achieve energy independence. With 2.1 gigawatts of power, equivalent to a nuclear reactor, the hydroelectric plant has brought light to cities and villages. New industries have developed along the Nile. Up until the 1980s, the dam provided over half of the country's electricity. Today, demand has increased, and it now only provides 25%.
When the dam was built, Egypt's population was only 25 to 30 million. Now there are 90 million of us, so obviously consumption has increased.
Progress and industrialization did not come without a cost. Once the dam was completed in 1970, Lake Nasser began to fill, flooding the entire Nile Valley between Aswan and northern Sudan. An entire region, Nubia and its ancestral culture, was engulfed beneath the waters like a modern-day Atlantis. At the time, over 100,000 Nubians were relocated to temporary accommodations in the desert, far from the Nile. Hundreds of thousands of date palms, their resource and treasure, disappeared forever. After years of exile, a few Nubians have begun to resettle along the lake. Fikri Kashef, for example, came back to live near the temple of Abu Simbel, where he worked as a guide. Here he has recreated the Eden of his childhood, as he remembers it before his entire family had to leave. He built a traditional home, an authentic hub of life and memory for his community. Here, Fikri and his friends continue to keep the traditional Nubian songs alive. Together, they remember the loss of their country and how the course of their lives was changed along with Egypt's. Dozens of Egyptian temples built along the Nile over 3,000 years ago also risked vanishing completely. UNESCO took emergency action, launching an appeal to the international community to salvage the most important ones. Some 50 countries took part in this astonishing rescue mission, which lasted over 10 years. This explains how the two temples at Abu Simbel, that of Ramses II and his wife Nefertari, were dismantled and rebuilt 64 meters uphill.
Here, the two temples of Abu Simbel were entirely carved into the rock in sandstone. UNESCO did something which was their most enormous undertaking ever. They cut the two temples into blocks.
The pillars were cut with very fine saws in the utmost of care. The stone is so fragile that the mere contact with water could turn it to dust.
The big temple was cut into 1,200 blocks, and Nefertari's temple into 450. In total, there were 1,650 blocks weighing between 10 and 33 tons. The blocks of crumbly sandstone were injected with synthetic resin to strengthen them.
Ramses II had his face amputated and taken to a storage zone. The distinctive rocky landscape around the temples had to be rebuilt exactly as it had been. In a modern exploit, the temples at Abu Simbel were thus moved safely and without harm down to the last piece, until the 20-meter-tall giants were able to be reassembled. The waters of Lake Nasser threatened these monuments of humanity's heritage, but international solidarity managed to save Abu Simbel, along with about 20 other of the most important ones.